No, it is. It's easily.
Like,
Same thing with the national ID.
yeah, yeah. We'll do the Senate Bill 16. You're gonna be killed.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Pretty good job.
We get to-
I turn them in
Okay.
there. They'll get them to you,
All right.
but they want to
Appreciate it.
do anything else besides this. All right. Did you give you a signal there's like 5 minutes to go, or 10 minutes, or 10 minutes till 10 till?
Yeah, 10 minutes is what I have, 10 minutes left to wrap up.
Okay, so at 11:40.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Here, I have an evaluation for you for this presentation. Evaluation. Thank you.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Here's another report. Thank you.
Is the bowling and the geography, geology?
Thank
Are you in sciences, right?
Thank you.
You're very
Which one are
welcome.
you in? Geography, yeah, okay.
Hello, how's it going?
Bowling, taking place over
Good,
there?
and you are? Hello. Evaluation form, thank you.
Very good.
You're welcome. Would you like it? Hello, there's an evaluation form for you. You're very welcome.
Trying to figure out where to stand so that you're not blinded and not in your way. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a short amount of time this morning. I'm Dr. Melody Wallen. I am the Associate Chair of the School of Business here at Eastern Illinois University, and I'm also the coordinator of the Graduate Studies in Business, which includes our MBA program. My biography sort of falls in the background of having work experience in banking and auditing, lending. I was a credit manager early in my career, had to go out and repossess things when people didn't make payments, which was not always fun. So you get to know a certain personality in that experience. I then went and worked in a men's prison, a maximum security unit. Again, started to see some behaviors that may be not the norm, and learning how to manage yourself around those individuals, what not to say or do, or to trigger any incidents. And then I decided to go get my PhD. So of course more bullying occurred for those of you who got your PhDs amongst your classmates and your faculty. And so this had always sat with me. I was sitting in on the last presentation just at the end there, and they were talking about girls bullying each other in high schools and junior highs and grade schools. And I was thinking, well, I grew up with 3 sisters, and yeah, I mean, we picked on each other all the time. We thought that was the norm, right? And some people grew up that way. Well, to extend from the conference's theme and talking about our communities, and many of you I know come from an educational background. This conference tends to bring in a lot of people from that industry. I'm going to turn the lens to a different part of our community, and that is for those of us as employees and those as managers of employees, supervisors. Because the truth of the matter is that little bullies grow up to be big ones. It doesn't just go away because you have a few more years on you. And the consequences become in some ways much more devastating in terms of employment and consequences that can emerge. And a lot of times what I have found is that managers say, well, there's not really much I can do. So out of that, a friend of mine was putting together a bunch of us who had an interest in employee behaviors. His wife actually is a PhD psychologist back east. And he said, with the people she knew and the people he knew, we could put together a book on workplace bullying, which is what we did. And our book that came out was called Bullying in the Workplace. It came out last August. It used to be for sale. I know at last year's conference we sold out. It was downstairs in our bookstore. It may not be there anymore now that it's a year old. It is by Routledge. The editors of the book are John Lipinski, Lipinski, and Laura Carruthers, Crothers. I'll pass it around in case any of you want to look at the table of contents. And somewhere in there, I think I'm chapter 17 or 18, it has an astoundingly wonderful, I'm 17, chapter 17, but there are 24 different chapters that different authors from multiple disciplines, education, psychology, sociology, business individuals, the HR field. So there's a whole group of us that contributed to different aspects that we felt we could speak most solidly to. And that's what I will be presenting today, is a little bit out of my chapter that gave managers hints for how they should address bullying behaviors at work. That's my focus. Instead of hearing managers say, well, it's just their personality. Well, bullying, as most of you know, you have an interest in this, so you're already ahead of the game of most people, is behavior. It's an act. You can have bullying thoughts all you want, and maybe we want to work on those at other ages, but when we get to employees and grown-ups and what managers and employees can do, really what we can control is behaviors. We can tell employees that behavior is unacceptable. Give me an example of another time that a manager or supervisor has told someone I won't necessarily say you, that's a behavior that's unacceptable at our organization or our company or our school. Examples of behaviors that are unacceptable, that you know when you go to work, unacceptable. Stealing. We know. You steal something, we come to you, we say, unacceptable. What are the consequences? You might lose your job, very likely to lose your position. Or you're going to be at least put on some kind of probation or move to a different position, but there's consequences. And we know that as a general rule of thumb, an employer is not going to tolerate stealing. Good example. What's another one?
Inappropriate
Touching. Inappropriately touching somebody at work. And why do we know that? What's kind of the overriding rule in business and work settings? Can you think of any? Like laws? Sexual harassment is the big one. People say, oh, okay, it's sexual harassment. Got it, there's a law for that. We know how to define it. We know where to find it. We know what some of the consequences have been according to judges and juries and trials that have already taken place in that topic. Give me something that's real mundane. Something employees do all the time, they get away with.
Coming in late to work.
Tardiness. Tardiness and absenteeism. I'm active in our local HR community because that's where my PhD background is in. And they talk a lot in our community, the absenteeism or tardiness. People just like, oh, I come into work. And they say, oh, we don't understand. Why don't these employees understand? You can't just show up to work an hour late. We're running a factory, the plant continues, or we're depending on you, you're part of a team. And that is a recurring theme, and so we talk about, what consequences do you have? How many chances do you give them? Tardiness, absenteeism. We have all these behavior rules at work. And yet, when you suddenly get to the issue of, well, okay, what's the rule about bullying? It becomes, well, I don't know, it's just somebody's personality. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's one of the major issues that I stand on as a fundamental belief about managing workplace bullying. You have to see it as a behavior. You have to be able to say, this is the bullying behavior, define it. Here's the consequences. Here's what our procedure is. It should be treated like anything else in terms of an undesirable behavior. Now, businesses put themselves in an interesting predicament. And organizations, organizations, not just businesses. But many times, and I see one of my MBA students here, we have always talked about what kind of employees do we like?
Yes.
What kind?
Very positive.
Positive employees,
Yes. Energetic.
energetic,
Yes. And passionate about your business.
passionate, motivated,
Outgoing. Team working.
maybe outgoing, work with others.
Yep. Team working.
Many times we look for people who are assertive. We want people who are going to stand up and take charge of a project.
Leadership.
Leadership skills.
Other-centered.
Other-centered, that would be nice. I know on a business side, we don't always look for that.
I do.
I know. Are you in a business setting or are you in an education setting? There you go. Okay. We want go-getters. We want people who are going to be driven. They're going to go out and get stuff done. Right? And so we're setting ourselves up sometimes in the business organizational setting as part of our hiring practices by looking for these people that will jump out and grab the reins and run with something. Well, guess what? That asset becomes a liability for us. That asset becomes a liability to us. Those individuals who we set up, and for those of you who maybe have experience or have family members in a sales environment, ask them if there's workplace bullying. My background as credit manager, absolutely. If I ran to go to the restroom during my shift and a customer or a sale came through the door, my coworker couldn't wait to elbow me out of the way, right? He was like, I don't know where she's at, let me help you. Okay? And it just becomes, it was like that was part of the culture. You wanted to be hungry, driven. You wanted the sale. You wanted to close the loan. So that becomes part of our culture that we as managers have to be aware of. We need to start looking for more. Not just are you good in a team, because a lot of people who bully will say they're great in teams. Because they are, they run the team. So you want to ask them follow-up questions. What type of roles do you play in a team? I'm always the leader. I always talk first. Okay, there's a clue. Does that fit with who you want and the type of person you want in the position you're hiring for? Again, I already mentioned to you, look at this as a managerial problem to be addressed and altered, that this is a manageable act. In my work experience, and I am a little bit older than I look, I would say I've probably had 8 or 10 bosses. And I would say out of those 8 or 10 bosses, 6 to 7 of them just acted like there was nothing they could do when we had employees like this. There's nothing. Very, very few people feel like they have the talent and the tools and the skills that they need to confront that person. They don't, it's messy, it's ugly. And many of us have personalities that want to avoid conflict. So that can become an issue. The pivotal person, if you're in the workplace with bullying behaviors, is the supervisor. How many of you are supervisors? About a third of the room? This is part of your managerial responsibility in leading, directing, controlling, and organizing others. It's just as important as all these other workplace behaviors and budgeting and organization of our companies, is to say the quality of life outcomes for my other employees. The quality of life for my customers in education, if it's teachers or professors. The quality of life that you're provoking on those students that person is interacting with. Because there is spillover. I don't believe that you suddenly change, the old leopard doesn't change his or her spots. I work with people that bully. And I see sometimes, I've seen a couple of times with 1 or 2 individuals, how they talk to students. And I sit there, and one time, as an administrator and a supervisor, I was called in. A faculty member was yelling at a student. Totally unacceptable. And another faculty member, actually 2 other faculty members overheard it in the hallway, came up and got me and said, you've got to come down and do something. And I walked in, I said, what's going on? The faculty member said, everything's fine. The student, it's not fine. Not fine. Okay? And so I stood there and waited while the conversation finished in a pleasant, commanding tone. Then afterwards, we had a conversation. I can't just say, I guess everything's fine, and go back to my office. Have to jump in and be willing to say something. You don't have to do it in a bullying fashion back. So that's part of what my chapter addresses are what are some of these ways that we as managers can actually address this bullying behavior. And the model that I've developed is a 4 pieces of pie model. And it falls into the categories of prevention. Let's see if things are rolling out here. Oop. We're bigger than the screen. falls into the categories of prevention, of looking at your organizational environment, including the culture, how you communicate, the structure. It addresses you as the manager and supervisor looking within yourself. What do I do that might provoke this kind of behavior? What do I have or not have that's preparing me to address these issues? And then the last one is some tips on how to intervene and what to say to that employee. Did you guys not get handouts in your packets?
No.
I sent them in so early. I'm so sorry. Yes.
They said they didn't have the budget to do handouts, but they're gonna do a Dropbox, so we'll have.
Oh, you're
access
gonna have them
to
electronically?
but we
I'm
don't yet.
sorry. I had heard that they were gonna print them, so thank you for following up on that. All right, well, you will get them, I guess, in Dropbox. And they're exactly what's up here. So I apologize. I would have brought them had I known. So hiring practice, let's start there. Does bullying behavior come from nature or nurture? Why?
You learn it. You learn that. You're not born with it. It's not a natural tendency. You learn it.
Okay. You started to say something?
Well, I think sometimes it can come from nature because of what do you call, the strongest always wins the fight.
Kind of natural selection. Yeah, whoever, your ancestors, they survived because they were the top of the pile. They didn't get squashed in the floods and whatever else came along, right? I found out, by the way, I have, my family, we have a biological genetic thing called factor V Leiden. And a biologist came in here a couple of years ago to Eastern and talked about it, who studies this. And he said, and I was the only one in the whole auditorium that knew what it was, and he goes, you must have it. And I said, I don't personally, but my sisters and my mother do. And he said, that is because your family survived the plague. He goes, people who survived the plague have that. And you come from that part of Europe. I say, yes, we do. And he said, yeah, that's what it is. So see, something we see as a detriment today now is, again, an asset, a liability in that case, or an asset back then became a liability for us down the road. It's called factor V Leiden, Leiden. It's a blood clotting disorder, where you throw blood clots. But there are people in the bullying literature who say it is somewhat, there may be some components of nature. What I have heard on the nature side is that a lot of it is kind of the hormonal surge or the endocrine system, that there's this rush of, and that the person has not learned how to manage that adrenaline rush, essentially. So they have the fight or flight response. So in my mind, it doesn't really matter in some ways. One of my friends who's a professor up at University of Anchorage, Alaska, we were at a conference last week together, and he does some work on trust behaviors in the workplace. And he's about to retire, and he got up there and he said, you know what, I am a recovering rageaholic. I was a jerk for the first 45 years of my life. And I had known him a long time, and he was. I remember him back then. He said, you know what, I had to learn to control my reactions. So then it comes back to, well, even if it's nature, nurture has a lot to do with it. Whether you've been taught it, watched it, or you've had those patterns of behavior corrected, or you've learned what's socially appropriate, nurture has a lot to do with this. So again, think about those employees who bully in your workplaces. Is it just that no one has ever stood up to them and said, gosh, that's really rude. That's really inappropriate. Now, one of the responses I have gotten from people, including my friend from Anchorage a few years ago when we started on this path of me and a couple of my students, we were writing on bullying, he said, bullying is covered under sexual harassment. If it's not sexual harassment, it's not bullying. True or false? False. And he stood there and he was like, and I felt terrible because it was one of my MBA students. She's up there and he's just ragging on her. And she stood there and she said, no, Dr. Wallen taught us it's not sexual harassment. That's part of what makes it so tricky. Because you can't say, well, it's against the law. Some bullying is sexual harassment. It is related to that, and it does qualify. But unkind words may not be. Manipulating information in the business world, that's a big bullying factor. It's one of the ones I see the most in our educational system and bureaucracy. I have that information, and I'm not going to tell you, but then we're going to get to a meeting, and I'm going to throw it on you in front of everyone. Thank you. I do so love that one. Okay. So, going back to, what can we do in our hiring practices? When we're looking at the applicant, when we're interviewing them, as I mentioned already, ask them about their interactions with their coworkers. But don't just listen to the answer. Ask them the follow-up questions. Can you give me an example? Do you work well in teams? Do you work well with others? Who is going to say, no, I don't? I hate other people. It'd be great if you could just put me by myself. You're never going to get any answer other than what you wanted to hear on the surface. So when they say, yes, I work very well in teams, great. Can you tell me a little bit about a couple of teams that you've been involved in and what role you play? Well, I'm always the leader. I always have to take charge because everybody else is an idiot. They never get things done like I want it done. Red flag, red flag. That's when you get deeper appreciation for that candidate. When we have employees that fool us, and you go back to those interviewing questions and you say, well, we asked them all the questions that are on the page. Yes, HR gives you the questions on the page. They don't always give you the follow-up questions because you have to improvise a little to the answer that the employee or the applicant just gave you. And there's nothing wrong with asking them questions about that. Have you ever felt a conflict when you were working with others? If so, tell me about that. Has there ever been a time where you couldn't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish because something was in the way? Was it a person? Was it an object? Was it a policy? If so, then they have them identify it. Then what did you do about that? We're not very good interviewers to be able to screen some of these behaviors out. People who have low empathy, they don't appreciate other people's feelings, are more likely to perceive that they deserved it. How many times have we heard that related to workplace bullying or any kind of bullying? It wasn't really bullying if they deserved it. I had somebody say that to me one time when I was complaining about being bullied. Well, you deserved it. I was there. Really? I wore a sign that said it's okay? I didn't think I did. Therapy was, well, I had to control that person. Well, there's lots of ways to do that. An easy way that's kind, or at least more neutral, is just to say, wow, maybe we need to take a break here. Let's stop for a second and regroup. And again, this goes back sometimes to just modeling as managers. If we can get this down, then we can share it and train our employees through them observing us and seeing us in these patterns and say, okay, this is how I need to respond. You don't have to bring people into a room like this and train them for 4 hours, hit them over the head. Let's practice being nice to each other. A lot of it, when we're talking about workplace behavior, is modeling. Many employees will go that extra mile because they see their supervisor going that extra mile. They'll come in on time, or they'll understand, oh, my boss really cares. You want to be there at 8:00, not 8:01. We look for social cues in our workplaces. So if you're modeling yourself these types of behaviors, it'll be more easy to train individuals. They'll get it, and they won't feel forced into getting it. Because you're not trying to change their value system. You're trying to change their behavior. And that's another line that is somewhat related to bullying, but I teach it when I teach HR and how to manage behaviors in the workplace, is that you don't start telling someone how they have to think or how they have to be. Because then you're challenging everything they've learned in their 20 years of being nurtured or that early period. Even if you don't agree with them, that's okay. But when I worked at the prison, one of the things that I really appreciated was we had this policy, an unwritten policy, that you could do whatever, believe whatever you wanted outside the prison. But when you stepped foot out of your car onto the prison property, you were a representative of that prison, you were not an inmate, you were employees, but still, you left everything that was you there in the car. I wasn't allowed to take a fork even in my lunch pail. I worked 9 doors in to the prison. 9 times I had to stop and let guards let me in to get to my desk. I didn't get to take nothing back there. Not my car keys, everything got left in my locker by the first door. But it was part of, and it literally is, transitioning you into saying, okay, that's my work life, home life, this is my employee life. Yes, we hope that people will change their values and belief systems in the long run. But when you start to challenge individuals and say, you shouldn't think that way, you shouldn't behave that way at work, that is not appropriate behavior at work. And we hope then they won't be bullying their family members and their dog and all the others around them and their neighbors. We hope that over time that becomes a part of who they are. And research does bear that out. If we can influence their behaviors at work, they will take that home and continue those behaviors everywhere else. Doesn't matter if it's related to perceptions of other individuals, ethnicity, race, gender, age, the discrimination categories. It doesn't matter if it's something about a belief system about the way bosses are and employees are. It doesn't matter. We've shown it in research with environmental concerns and whether people care about recycling or if they care about giving back to their communities. If the company does it and they start giving back as part of their company behaviors, they will start taking it home and doing those behaviors at home over time. So bullying behaviors can work the same way. We hope over time that their belief systems might change about how they should treat people, but our concern as employers is the behavior. Stick to that and you'll be a lot more successful in convincing them. People with antisocial behaviors, I've already told you, the people I want to work by myself, I hate other people, they never work out, they always disappoint me. Just try not to hire them. Try not to hire them. We also talk in business and management about not hiring prima donnas, by the way. Doesn't matter how great they are and how much they are the only employee you could possibly hire for this one position. We challenge HR folks to say, maybe not. Maybe it's better to hire the B+ candidate instead of the star A person because of the disruption that star A person might bring. And the fact that they burn out a lot faster, they expect more, they burn out, they challenge everyone else, they get more perks, they expect more, and it may disrupt all of your other employees and cause you more damage in the long run. And usually, those stars come in and leave. They give you 2 or 3 years and pop out. So the B+ employee might stay there 10 years and actually develop into something you want much more. The other thing, if you have trouble getting positive references, that can be a good indication that the person may have some adverse behavior, which includes bullying. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a bully, they've had bullying behavior, but it does mean, there's something going on here. How would you know if you're getting less than a favorable reference? How would you know? You've been assigned, and even if you're not a manager, maybe you're an intern or a student employee and you're told, call these references and just see what they have to say about this candidate. Or you're an early employee, you're on the search committee.
Well, you can ask the question, would you hire this person again?
Okay, so you ask it. How do you know if that person who's answering you is giving you an unfavorable? If they say, no, I would not, okay, they can be obvious.
Right.
Sometimes it's not so obvious. What's another cue that a lot of people use to give an unfavorable evaluation without giving an unfavorable evaluation?
They say very little.
They say very little.
Very indirect.
Very indirect, or very direct in terms of, all I can tell you is that person worked in this position on these dates. You're like, well, would you hire them again? I can tell you that person worked here on those dates in this position. That's how HR people talk when they're giving, or managers who know and been trained. They're sending a signal to you. And the signal is, there's a lot more here I want to tell you, and I can't. All I'm gonna tell you is this. Okay, thank you very much.
So when they don't offer anything but facts.
Yep. And very limited facts. Because most of the time, the only information that they'll want to give you and have been authorized to give you is, you can confirm the person's title and that they worked here on those dates. That's all they'll say. They won't say anything about their actual performance. They won't say anything about their pay. They won't say anything else. Like you say, well, can you tell me a little bit about their work attendance, their absenteeism? No, I'm sorry, I cannot. Now, it's not always true. But if you call 3 of their references and you get similar responses from all 3, that's a big red flag. And so you don't want to use any one piece of information in isolation when you're hiring, but you do want to see a pattern of behavior. And that's why we ask the questions in the interview, and then maybe we say, well, maybe I just didn't understand their way they responded. Maybe they really did have that extreme situation. They're a great employee, but they really were fired up about that one group activity that really blew up in their face. And so they got so heated, they just came across as very negative. So don't take any one piece, but do look at it more holistically. One of my students, as part of the big project that we did 3 or 4 years ago, she now works for the City of Champaign in economic development. She had an interest in HR and workplace bullying. She's one of the kindest, sweetest students I've ever taught, and she grew up in the Tuscola area. And she did a study of employers and asked them, who should develop this anti-bullying policy? And she asked owners of companies and top managers, who should develop these policies? According to her studies, this big blue section, this is HR's job. This is HR's job. But I thought it was also interesting to me, there was 24% said, I don't really care. It doesn't matter who does it, as long as somebody does it. So if we do it together, if we all do it, if I do it, if the employees do it, doesn't matter. Very few, the smallest group said, this should really be driven by employees. Again, reflecting back that there is somewhat of a perception out there that this is something managers and HR people need to take the lead on. Your employees are probably thinking, we should be part of this, we should have some kind of committee, and it does depend on your organization. In this particular case, we were serving businesses. And we were serving businesses in East Central Illinois. And they said, no, this is really a manager's responsibility or a company's responsibility to be on the forefront of this. Now, as part of some other data we collected, they said, we don't need a bullying policy, of course. Most of them said, when it comes up, we'll then deal with it. But until then, there's no reason to have one, which was not the answer, of course, we wanted to hear. Components of a policy, you'll have this slide in the PowerPoint, but as you start to develop these policies, again, being preventative, you want to address explicitly, this is not tolerated, and give specific examples. Just like absenteeism, all these other tardiness, sexual harassment, bullying, here's some examples of what bullying looks like. The unacceptable versus acceptable, the identifying the hierarchical level in the process. Who do you go to? If bullying has occurred to you, these are the steps you take, and this is how long you should expect before you go to the next step. So if you get no response within 5 business days after you report it to your supervisor, then contact this next level. And then if nothing happens within 5 business days, go to the next. And the reason why I say 5 business days is because that has been a standard that has been widely used in the court system for sexual harassment investigations. So there is no rule, but there has become sort of an understanding in the HR community to say what is reasonable amount of time to take action on something like sexual harassment. And that the answer has been 5 business days. So I'm going to extrapolate that because bullying and behavioral kinds of things kind of fall together, that if bullying were against the law, you would expect kind of a similar reasonableness test. The last one that you can't see there is include and develop progressive discipline. So it's not you bullied, you're fired, but you bullied and the consequence, the first time is a written warning, the second time suspension, the third time termination. That's all documented in your employee handbook and for the expectations. Second big component of prevention is training. And lots and lots and lots and lots is written about training. So you can pick up almost any kind of book on HR and training employees and get the basics. It's just the content that changes. There's nothing really unique or new here in this particular section. So train both the employee and the supervisor. Make sure that they are aware of this prevention and how to intervene, the words, the role playing of how to confront bullying. And then in the United Kingdom, there was a study, they surveyed executives and they said training was what worked for them. That was the most effective approach to handling workplace bullying, was to actually sit down and train people how to respond. Okay, the second big piece of the pie is the organizational environment. And in this area, we start talking about organizational culture. I've already integrated some hints throughout what I've talked about so far about communication and having your employees talk kindly to one another and learning that's when you cross the line, and hey, how to talk and say, I didn't appreciate that. Or, you know what, we're going a little far here. I've been in meetings where I've done it and my coworkers have done it. Where we just said, hey, okay, I didn't mean that, I'm sorry. Anybody ever had to apologize after a meeting because you've gone too far? You? I know you.
No.
Me too. Me too. I got really mad one day. 6 years ago. Got in a fight with one of my colleagues here. We had a fundamental disagreement on how to address an issue related to our department. Academics are notorious for them, correct? We're very embedded in our belief systems. Okay? And he and I started yelling, and then we took it out to the hallway, and we were still yelling down the hall. He's my boss today, by the way. Okay? But the very next day, I went in and said, wow, I was totally out of control. I am so, so sorry. I did not mean to yell at you. And I have always respected him for his response. You know what? He said, it's okay. We both are passionate about what we're talking about. We love our department. It was actually, we were arguing about the MBA program. Because we love this program. And we had different perceptions about how to proceed. And he goes, I understood where you were coming from. And I'm coming from the same place, but I am coming at it from a different aspect. And then he said, and I'm the one who's in charge right now. And I said, fair enough. You heard me. That's what I wanted to know, is that you heard my suggestions. And he said, water under the bridge. And we have worked together fine. And many people saw us yelling at each other and communicating poorly. Many people saw us that day. And they thought, well, they'll never be able to work together again. We are great. We work together fabulously. Because we didn't let it fester into some other kind of behavior. And it could have, very easily. One little thing starts exploding in a business environment. And in an organizational environment, as many of you know. So, the apology. The apology is important. Train employees. It's okay to come up to each other the next day and say, I'm so sorry. Let's not make this into something. Let's just move on. I messed up. And again, research and people who they have followed with bullying behaviors, the victims of the bullying have said, that was enough. It was enough in many cases to stop legal actions. It was enough that that employee who felt victimized said, you know what, I was going to file for disability and take 6 weeks off because I was so upset about this. Oh, but you're going to apologize? Okay. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt. But hey, you heard me, you acknowledged that you did something that was inappropriate. I'm going to drop whatever legal action I had, I'm done. It's shocking that the apology research in this area of sexual harassment and workplace bullying really, really demonstrates that has a huge impact. You get employees to do that kind of communication. Yes, ma'am?
What if it's been done to you and the apology will never be given?
Yeah, then we continue down the path of what else can we do? Can you remove yourself from that environment?
No.
Has the supervisor ever talked to that employee?
Oh, yes.
The employee doesn't care. Then we get back to what's coming up in the next section. And again, I gave you more information in the handouts with points there on how to address these. The manager's behavior. And I'm going to skip to answer your question. So there's a whole thing about management. Do managers trust? In environments where there's not very much trust, managers will have to do more controlling. And then the more the managers start to control you, the more that the people who like to bully figure they have to control, and it's acceptable to control. So it goes back into that cultural building, and as a manager saying, I have to be willing to let go and trust that the employees are going to do the right thing if I'm assigning them this project, this committee, this task. I'm not going to ask them to work through this project for 3 months, and they bring me their final product, and I say, well, I don't really care what you guys did because I already knew what I was going to do anyway. Not trust building. Says, I don't care, I'm going to withdraw. So I'm going to move on in through that. Bigger issues of justice. It goes back to that manager's training. If you were bullied by another employee, and they're aware of it, and they've talked to the employee, is that employee still working there? Yes. Why? Was it a one-time incident?
Pretty much.
Okay. But they won't apologize to you.
She said you'll never, probably never will.
Yeah. So at that point, you know, when I tell my students when they get into situations at work where they're like, what is this? I say, then it becomes your judgment call about whether or not you can look the other way and keep going, or you feel like, well, no, this is symptomatic of the organizational reaction. This is how the organization handles other problems. In some other research that I do, it's very interesting. Managers tend to see issues at work as just one single episode. It was a dot. But employees about those same issues will say, no, this is pervasive throughout. This is a symptom of something else going on.
It's bigger.
There is a huge disconnect between how managers see issues and how employees see issues. And in my experience, the employees are right. It's the managers who are doing a lot of transactional thinking throughout the day. I've got this email, I've got this person to meet with, I've got this meeting, everything just becomes a transaction. And so it gets harder as you get pressured for more time to see the bigger picture of the forest for the trees. And so I go back to, okay, then your manager probably has not handled this well. But on this other side, it may be that they just say, this is a decision for you to make as the employee. Is it something you can live with or not?
Be professional, work with them.
Be professional and keep working with them. I will say I had my first semester here, I had a professor yell at me in front of my whole class of 35 students. And I was stunned. I'd never been upbraided like that before in front of a group of students by a colleague. And for 5 years, I avoided that person at every turn. I never spoke to them again. I would walk the other direction. Well, eventually we ended up being office mates right next to each other. And I knew instantly that person came over and was like, welcome to the neighborhood. That person had no idea what they had done and how I had felt about it all those years. They had no idea. And to this day, that person hugs me, and I've moved to a different place in the building. They come, I miss you, gosh, you were so great. They have no idea how badly they hurt my feelings 10 years ago. So I'm never going to get an apology. Even if I brought it up, that person looked at me and said, I didn't say that. Yeah, you did. And it was pretty embarrassing.
May I just kind of
Yeah.
clarify a point or just get your opinion?
Absolutely.
A singular bullying behavior, to me, is just bad behavior. I always thought bullying is something that has to persist. Is that not your understanding?
I would say it doesn't have to persist. It could be, again, an incident, it's a behavior, but in order for us to really, well, I'm going to take it from a legal perspective more and kind of, again, put it in the framework of how we, for legal purposes, if you are sexually harassed once, is it sexual harassment? Yes, but it's not actionable until you say that's unwanted. Unless it's criminal, right? Unless they just out and out harm you. But if they come up and they make some kind of wisecrack at you and you say, wow, that's sexual harassment, you have to say, as part of the standard of law, essentially, is, did you tell them it was unwanted? It doesn't mean it wasn't sexual harassment to begin with. So to me, bullying behavior can be a one-time incident. Now, is it actionable? May not be until it becomes persistent. To me, that's the distinction I always make.
Okay. So what would be, I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, please.
But so there is no difference between, you gave the example when you blew up in a meeting.
Yeah.
To me, that doesn't sound like bullying behavior. That sounds like bad behavior that you needed to
Okay.
apologize for. But I guess I'm just not understanding.
That's a perception, right?
That's just my perception. Okay.
Because I know that there were colleagues of mine who said I was being a bully.
Okay.
That's their perception in that particular case. That was evidence for them and yes, it was a single data point, then you could take the 150 data points they had about how nice I am, but they're gonna say, oh no, I've seen her in action.
Right. And that would be an incident that you could be disciplined for if you're.
Possibly,
But
yeah.
not probably for bullying because it was a one-time. So
Correct.
I'm HR perspective. So
I know, and that's good, because that's how HR is gonna ask you when you go in there and say, I've been bullied. They're gonna say, okay, let's know, is it persistent? Has it happened more than once? Did you tell them it was unwanted? What was the context? How long did it go on? Was it pervasive? You're absolutely right. They're going to ask all these questions, and that's really why there's no law to this.
Right, there's no legislation and there's very
Because
few company
nobody knows
policies.
what to do about separating. Gosh, that apology came right behind it less than 24 hours later or 3 minutes later. I am so sorry I blew up at you. I meant what I said, but I shouldn't have said it the way I said it. And everybody just moves on.
Right, but abusers do that same sort of behavior.
They do. And so then you start looking at a persistent pattern of behavior. Not a great answer, but that's kind of the world
No,
we're
it's
living in
clear
with
it's not.
workplace
I mean, I
bullying
just-
right now. So to me, it's still behavior that should be addressed, just because it may not be pervasive yet. You want to stop it as early as possible and say, hey, let's not do that in this workplace. Okay, you guys can read this, different things, the stuff I've already said, it just summarizes. But I did want to just introduce you right at the end some tips about intervention. Because to me, the prevention is great, and we tend to be very good at making rules and policies and employee handbooks, but then we aren't sure, and you might be good at it, but then you move to a different position, and whoever comes behind you wasn't part of the development, they don't know what to do. So one of the great quotes is by a set of researchers. It's a husband and wife team, the Namies, and the Namies are known as one of the big names in workplace bullying. I would say they're probably one of the two of the top 3 names in this field. And they remind us all that to look the other way, to do nothing, is taking action. That is action. That is saying, by not acting, I think that this behavior is not that bad. That the fact that your feelings were hurt, well, you should just get over it. And those types of behaviors are the ones that then escalate and potentially become those lawsuits and those battles in HR and those long-term arguments with employees up and down the halls. Versus just being able to go in there and saying, hey, I heard yesterday at the meeting there was some yelling between a couple of you. What's going on? And I don't want that. I don't think we want that as part of our organization. And then they have a chance to sit there and say, you're right, I was a little heated, I was a little heated. Okay, give it a shot at least. Because again, research has demonstrated the apology is incredibly powerful towards nipping a lot of this in the bud. Recognizing that this is a serious issue, all of you again are here, so I don't need to give you a big speech about that. You're hearing it probably in other sessions as well. And that you look at what preceded the bullying. Was it stress? Was it something going on in their personal life? And sort of using that in your managerial supervisory judgment about how to respond and how to appropriately address the employee that you want to talk to about their behaviors. You don't need to keep throwing fuel on the fire if everything else in their life is falling apart. So use some common sense, I guess, in that, and seeing what's the bigger picture here. Look at the behaviors and be sure to specify, here's how you could have handled it. Here are some alternatives for next time. And then the third part is the consequence. I am putting this in your file as that I have talked to you. It's a verbal warning or it may be a written warning. But if this behavior continues or we see it again in the next 6 months, there will be consequences. Please sign here acknowledging that you've received this piece of paper so that 6 months later you can terminate them or go through the discipline. That's the part, if you're coming from HR, that absolutely makes HR people crazy. You've given them 16 verbal warnings. Are you kidding me? What consequence is there? After the second one, they knew, doesn't matter. Goes one ear out the other. Now we can't fire them because in the meantime, you've been giving them good performance evaluations, telling them their teamwork is great. Thanks. Okay, we hurt ourselves sometimes, and we don't mean to. Did you have a hand or just okay? One of the theories that I really was so delighted to find, and it's an old theory that's been around, but I've never, until I worked on the bullying chapter, and a group of scholars had this theory called accountability theory. And I thought about that a lot, just the idea of accountability in addressing employee behavior. How many times, particularly in the workforces that we work in today, with some generational differences that have emerged, do we say, you are accountable, you are responsible. Yes, you have this position, but with great responsibility, right? You have an obligation. You're accountable for your personal actions. Yes, but she did this, she said that. My reaction to that is, wow, it sounds like we're talking brothers and sisters or sisters and sisters at 10 years old. Yes, but. Right. Your parents ever tell you there's no yes but in the room? Right? There's yes, but. Yes, but. There's no buts. There's no buts about it. You are accountable for your reactions. People will make you mad in this world. And that seems to be a lesson that some of us as employees haven't learned yet. Yes, but even if you're angry, doesn't give you license to then tear apart someone else for 5 minutes in front of a group of people. I hope that's not me, okay? No, it's okay. So make sure that they understand. You are still accountable no matter how angry or how upset you are about whatever was said. Discipline and termination. Make sure that you're being clear. Many of us, and I'm speaking largely to the women in the room, we don't like to give bad news sometimes. It's uncomfortable to appear, and it doesn't matter if our peer is female or male. We just feel, because we have a nature-nurture thing going on about, oh, I don't want to be the bad guy in this, and I want him to still like me when it's all over. But you have to be direct, and the best way to be is short, simple, and to the point. It's like ripping off the Band-Aid. What you did yesterday was inappropriate. That's behavior we don't tolerate here at work. And it's really important to me that that not continue. What do you have to say about the incident? Let them talk so that they're heard. Okay, then what the outcome of this is a verbal warning. It will be documented that I've given you a verbal warning on this. If it happens again in the next 6 months, blah, blah, blah. What some of us tend to do when we get in those situations is, well, you know, I like you, you're a great employee, you know, I can always depend on you, and then you start sandwiching the message, and they get mixed messages very quickly. This should be a 2 to 5 minute conversation. It doesn't have to be a half-hour meeting. I really like you, but we can't have this. But, you know, remember, now go out there and do a good job. Sandwiching those kinds of messages from a disciplinary perspective really confuses the employee. They hear the first couple of sentences, and they hear the last. And the rest of it in between, they're just sitting there going, how do I defend myself? What is this going? My gosh, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch, kind of thing. So straight to the point, in writing if possible. So in conclusion, 4-pronged approach. And when you get your slides, or when they go to the Dropbox or whatnot, go ahead and, you know, if you remember the pie, and say, okay, do we have steps for prevention in our organization? Have we thought about the culture and the communication? The structure issue, by the way, real quickly as we let go, is do you have physical spaces in your office, your workspace, that would allow someone to be cornered? There's a physical aspect to the structure of your organization. Is there a hallway? Is there a little nook? Is there a blind spot that no one can see where you could grab somebody and dress them down and talk badly to them? There's a reason why we like rooms with lots of glass walls in business settings. Because you don't want to give physical spaces to isolate employees. It's not safe, and both psychologically and physically in some cases. Then we think about the manager themselves. Some of us work for people who don't have managerial training. It's shocking, but true. They were good at their job, and they got promoted into management, but have no idea what management means or does, but everybody thinks they do. And as a management PhD, I'm telling you, everybody thinks they know what management is. I did too. And then you start teaching it, and you start saying, actually, it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of psychology in it. So you take your best salesperson, or you take your best production worker, and you make them the lead. They may not be good with humans. They're really good with operations. So they may just not have the training. So if you have a supervisor like that, and you're saying, why aren't you dealing with your employees? It may not be all their fault as much as, gosh, you really need to go somewhere and, go talk to HR, have HR talk to them about getting some training so they know what to do. And then the last part, make sure you do something, because doing nothing is doing something. And with that, thank you for all your time. I hope you enjoy your lunch and the rest of the day here at Eastern, and thank you for coming to my session.